Rocking Entrepreneur, Episode 2.
It is important that you follow what you believe that you want to do, even if it pays lesser.
Hello, fellow rockstars. I'm so excited to have Anu Acharya here today. Anu, are you ready to rock?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Anu has several awards to her credit: Red Herring Magazine's list of 25 tech titans under 35, Biospectrum Entrepreneur of the Year for 2008. Anu was named a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum for its class of 2011. She also writes an opinion column for the Hindu Business Line. Anu was the founder and CEO of Ocimum Biosolutions and is presently the CEO of Map My Genome. Welcome to the show, Anu. I've given our listeners a brief introduction, so take your time and describe a bit more about yourself personally and expand on your amazing ventures.
Sure. Thanks, Tushar. So just as a background, I'm now second-time entrepreneur. I started my entrepreneurial journey about 15 years ago, which was around 2000, although that is technically. And before that, I think while I was in IIT Kharagpur, the first thought of getting started in the entrepreneurial field was sparked in me at that point. But clearly, there wasn't something I could do immediately. But over a period of time, I decided that that was the area that I wanted to be in, that I wanted to start a business that had significant impact on people around me. And in the year 98, 99 was when we decided on Ocimum Bio, which was in a field that was completely new. It was something that would be difficult and engaging over a period of time. And that's how I got started with Ocimum with two other co-founders at that time. So this was a company in which we had started in bioinformatics. What we really wanted to solve was it was in the area of genomics, and we wanted to be able to produce world-class both software products as well as solutions from India. And then over a period of time, we managed to acquire three companies, two in Europe, one in the US, and became the largest bioinformatics genomics company out of India. But one of the things that was driving me to actually make change or to move to Map My Genome was really the impact factor that we could bring along with a company like Map My Genome, because you're now being able to change behavior and be able to inspire healthier living to people around us. And I think that is what brought me towards the field of consumer genomics, and that's how Map My Genome was started about 2 years ago. So that's in very brief what I've been doing so far.
So how did you get here today in terms of your personal career? I know you were in the US before and then you decided to move back to India and start something. How did that happen? How did you decide, and how easy of that transition was for you?
So I think, like I said, I've always wanted to start something right from my first or second year in college. It was at that point, I think entrepreneurship wasn't the normal route that people took. Most people ended up going to the US, doing higher studies and working somewhere. And only later did people think about starting their own businesses. So for me, the only constraint was that, I wanted to go to the US, which I did. And I went to the US, got a couple of masters. And after that, joined a startup. And I think the reason I joined a startup and not the other companies that I was offered positions in was primarily to be able to learn what it was to, how you can actually learn how a startup functions and what are the challenges and all of that. So in 96, I started working on a company in 96 or 97. Clearly now I've forgotten a lot of details, but I started working for a company in the telecom space, and it was a startup. And it was very interesting because it was a very small company at that time. And during the time that I was with the company, which was about a year and a half, it grew to 150 people from hardly 6 or 10 people when I joined them. So I think it gave me an incredible view into how, companies can grow and how disruptive technologies could actually change the way people actually, look at telecom and other spaces. But it didn't mean that I wanted to be in telecom. I think it was more a learning experience on the process itself. And then after that, I worked for a larger company, which was in the consulting space. And the reason I did that was I wanted to know what happens later. You know, when you start off in a startup, the processes are very different. Your decision making is quick. You have a lot of interesting things going on. Every day is a new day. But eventually, I think the company has to graduate into being an organization. So I wanted to see how that would transition into. And I worked consulting firm for about a year and a half, and then decided that it was time that we would actually get started on our own venture. But during the time I was working in all these two companies, there were lots of business ideas. There were lots of interesting things that we thought about, but not all these things actually become into a real business, because when you are not committed to it 100% or 200%, an idea can be a great idea, but not a real company. And it was only once we decided that we would, Ocimum sounded like a great business plan, that we gave up our jobs without trying to figure out all the risk, background and all of that. I think that the day we decided that we would actually do that was the day I think that you truly become an entrepreneur, because you've taken that big risk and jumped towards that area. And that's how at least I got started. And with me was also my husband and another co-founder who had also started with me. So both of us, my husband and me, decided to move back to India from Chicago at that time. So it was a difficult time, because I think it was it was just the time when everything had started to look nice and rosy. Our jobs were very good. And then we suddenly made a decision to pack everything and go back to India. And we had just also had a baby at the same time. So it was an interesting time for us, when it was not just taking care of one baby, but two at the same time. And that's how we got started. In November of 2000, we moved back to India, and March of 2001, we actually had the company running and started.
Amazing story. I love how there's so much to learn from the story. Going back quickly into the history, when you were about to get your first job, instead you decided to join a startup in the US. I know a lot of people, especially in India, have this IT jobs and various other jobs that come to them that give a good pay. What sort of advice do you have for them? And based on your experience, what do you think is more important in deciding whether to go or not to go for such a job?
No, I think ultimately it depends on what the person wants, right? And I think if all the person is looking for is a stable salary, I think they can go for whatever gives them the highest compensation. But the reality is that when you want to build a career, the early years of your life should be built in doing things that you really love. Because if you don't do that, then you would forever do things that you don't love, right? So it is important that you follow what you believe that you want to do. And I think that even if it pays lesser, and in my case it did, it was almost 5 to 10,000 lower than the job that I was about to accept. And I did that because I really believed I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and that this would give me more opportunity and more ways to learn about being an entrepreneur than working in a company that would give me a far higher salary, because then you're looking at it very short term. If you're looking at a longer term perspective, then it is important that you learn, because you will regret that much later on in life, because it's very easy to have an early start to your higher pay. But it's like my dad said, life is a marathon. If you are running in the beginning very fast, just so that you think that you're going ahead by getting a little bit extra pay, I don't think that builds your foundation, and you don't get to where you ultimately have to reach. At some point, then people become they tend to, if they don't like it, then they tend to you know do it, regret it, but continue that life, which I think is, if that's what they desire, they'll do that. But if somebody wants to be able to build something, do something in their lives, they should do what they love. And I think that was the only thing that I followed when I was at that time frame. And I didn't really think about other options to to look at from that point of view.
I just love every bit of your story. It's just amazingly inspiring. So let's switch gears a little bit. Could you talk a little bit about Map My Genome, what you're doing right now, and how does that fall into the entire picture?
Certainly. So, what we did for 15 years in Ocimum was in the field of genomics, and it was great because we were able to create research as a service model. We are working with all the best pharma and biotech companies. So most of the bigger companies that are in this field, we were working with all of them. But I think it had a very limited scope in terms of what could be done with consumers and people around me. So when I looked at people who were my neighbors and everybody else, I found that they all knew that we were doing something interesting, but that was about it. It didn't make a change in their life. It didn't impact them in any form or shape. So when we started thinking about Map My Genome, there were two things that inspired me to do that. One was a database that we had within our own company at that point, which is called BioExpress, which is one of the best databases in genomics, and it belongs to Ocimum. And BioExpress had a very large number of samples that were collected, and it had a lot of information on each of these anonymized samples, but it also helped a lot of the big pharmaceuticals in early biomarker discovery and drug discovery. Now, when you think about it from a bigger perspective in terms of what can be done from consumer point of view, we wanted to build something for that, for the Indian community. Because even though we are one of the largest populations, I think we are one of the least studied populations in the world. And that was one of the motivations. The second thing was that if we can actually inspire people to be able to take a test like Genome Patri, which is our first test in this space, that we could not just give them a genetic report, and that genetic report is not associated with disease, but it is also associated with life. That we could tell them that everybody has some predisposition to some things, everybody has some strengths, and all of that have come through their ancestors. We could actually help them understand that, but we also help them understand their family history and their current lifestyle, and inspire them to be able to change what they currently do in terms of their diet, in terms of their exercise, in terms of how they look at disease in the first place. And I think we've been fairly successful in getting a lot of people who have done the test to actually make those changes in their lives. And we hope that we can continue to make these large impact with the test that we are currently providing. So it's not just Genome Patri which is what we started with, which is the most comprehensive test and covers about 120 conditions, but we also then subsequently, based on physician advice and based on consumer advice, we also then created a lot of the sub-panels like Cardio Map, Onco Map, Brain Map, Gynec Map, and now we've come up with really low-cost tests like Sugar Gene and Slim Gene and so on, because you want people to be able to say, if you can control obesity, for instance, I think you also made a big impact in controlling things like diabetes or cardiac conditions and so on. So, if there are any ways to be able to do that, and if there are low cost ways, we are trying to find those solutions to be able to help people around us. So that is one part of the business that we work on. The second is more on the infectious diseases, where we have these kits for tuberculosis, and these kits are help in diagnosing patients whether they have a particular strain of tuberculosis or not. And we've now come up with a real-time PCR-based kit, which is you can test it in 3 hours, get a 99.96 accuracy in terms of the diagnosis itself. And we are also giving away the actual machine free with large volumes of samples that can be processed. So we can actually improve tremendously how tuberculosis detection is currently done in India, which is a lot of it is still at about 60-70% accuracy. So I think those are the two big challenges that we are hoping to solve. And the third, obviously, is to be able to take what we are building and make that data available for use for the research and the pharma community.
What I love the most about your story is that you took so many learnings you had from Ocimum and just applied it to solve a direct customer pain. in Map My Genome. That's just great. So we all know that a journey of a successful entrepreneur is full of failures that offer so much to learn. So take us to that moment in time of what you would consider your worst entrepreneurial moment and tell us that story.
Sure. So I think, like every entrepreneur, we have gone through several areas. Issues and problematic areas. But there is one obviously that stands out far more obvious than everything else. I think this happened 3-4 years ago when company was doing very well. We had everything going for us, but clearly in 2008-9 we lost an opportunity to acquire yet another company that we wanted to because of the financial crisis. But we decided at that point that we would get somebody to run our US operations. So we recruited somebody, and I think even though the person had fantastic credentials, I think we ended up ultimately closing down, selling a portion of that business and closing down some of the services that we offered from the US. And I think it was probably the toughest thing ever possible, and it was obviously the decisions were all mine. So those are things that you learn much later, but it is something that I think until you go through it you won't realize that that does give you a lot of time to reflect and think about what can be, that there sometimes mistakes happen, but some of these mistakes, while some can be prevented, the others are necessary things to build a more solid foundation. So I think that was our biggest and the toughest time that we've done, because you build a company for a very long period of time, and then a portion of that you see that suddenly crumbling is not an easy thing to do.
So how did you come out of the situation?
Well, I think what we said was, we took decisions that were, we said, one way is to continue to go that path and continue to bring in more money and keep burning more. Or the other is to be able to, cut the losses and move on. Right. So I think ultimately that's what happened when we realized that the fall was very tremendous, quite very quick, and it all happened within 1 year. We decided that we would cut the losses and sell a portion of the company and move on to making Ocimum more profitable, even though it is then a smaller company. So I think that's what we did, and I think I took a fairly practical approach to the problem, saying that that's what you need to do. You accept that you make a mistake and you move on. You learn something from it, but you have to move on and build something far stronger than that. So I think that's how at least that part came out. But at the same time, I think once we were able to then create Ocimum as more of India-based entity rather than make it completely having multiple offices. It has been more profitable overall. But I somehow felt that there was something else I needed to do. And I think this was all happened around the same time when Map My Genome was in formation. So there were lots of things going on at the same time, and I decided to pick a path that would allow me to take the decision that would actually be most impactful. So I think in 2013 that was the decision I took, and decided to move out of Ocimum and move into Map My Genome, where I could make a bigger difference.
Love it. So also in the path and journey of an entrepreneur, there are a lot of aha moments, and I'm sure you must have had a lot of these moments in your life. Take us to one of those moments in time and share an incredible aha moment that you have had, and tell us the story leading up to your aha moment.
So I think again it was around this same time frame when I said the US operation had a very rough time. But at that same time, I think one of the things we were doing at that point, I think it was December of 2012, December or one of those few days that we took off, and we were at a vacation, and I was sitting over there, reflecting about what had happened. And one of the things was to look at the waves and say, I was reading a book which I had also read much earlier as well, and it was called Against the Gods. And this is the story of risk. where I don't know if you've seen that painting, but there is a painting it's called The Storm or this Sea of Galilee. I'm trying to remember if I remember the exact words, but essentially this was about, the book was about financial risk, but it was about saying, it also had a lot of interesting stories about how, you had people who went to sea, but they really started, it was not that people didn't sail before the compass was invented, but that people would, the possibility of them being able to go and come back safe was much, much higher once you had tools like the compass that were invented. And so we said, maybe if we had something which could be like a compass for people to understand what is the, right path and what is the more dangerous path, people from a health perspective, they would be able to actually lead their lives more better, right? So it was about understanding risk, and it was about understanding what lies ahead, and what, if there is something that is coming, it's not that you should ignore it, but you should be able to take the route that is going to be the best for you based on what lies ahead. And I think that was the time when we were sitting over there reflecting, but also, enjoying the vacation, that I came up with the idea for what Map My Genome should be about, in terms of the positioning, in terms of what it can do for individuals. So that was, in some ways, one of the aha moments.
Amazing. I love your story, and next time I go on vacation, I'll make sure I'll take that book.
Sure, sure. I'll send you the exact right book once later on by email.
Absolutely, and we'll put it in the show notes for our audience to go through that book as well. So that brings me to my next round, called the rocking round, where the questions are a little bit more shorter and more concise. So let's get right into it. What is your biggest strength as an entrepreneur?
I think I enjoy being around people, and I give credit to people and get them to do the best things they can. So I think that, I'm a people's person, and I fully use that as a strength in everything that I do.
What's your biggest weakness as an entrepreneur?
I get very obsessed about certain things for a period of time, and then so for that period of time there will be a lot of, there's a lot of interest, and then I lose interest. So that part is where the challenge is. That's where my team comes in.
Have you ever find any solution for that weakness? Because I have the same weakness too.
And so you have to find people who are not like you then, right? So your co-founders, your team members, your core team have to be the ones who pick up the slack when you start to do that. And I think with Map My Genome, I've done it much faster than I did with Ocimum, because you can't change yourself that much. So that's it. You get other people who can do that better than you.
Absolutely. So what is one thing that has got you excited the most right now?
Right now, I think it is to build this massive database that we can, but that is going to be for at least a few more years on how we're going to get there by selling a lot more genome per trees.
What vision do you have for the future and Map My Genome in general?
So the vision is to get, to be able to save at least, not to be able to impact at least 100 million lives, and to be able to build something for a million, Indian users in terms of the data.
It's really powerful. I hope you reach there very quickly.
We hope so too.
All right, so finally we have entered into our last round, which is the lightning round, which are kind of the rapid fire questions. So let's dive right into it. What was holding you back from becoming an entrepreneur?
Nothing really. I think it was. I just waited to get to the point where I was ready to move.
You've been in the US for some time. How different is it being an entrepreneur in India versus in other places?
Oh, India is a different land. So in certain cases, it is fine. I think when it involves a lot more activity with interfacing with the government, with normal this thing, you have to have much your dealings are going to be slightly different. So you have to be a lot more stronger to be an entrepreneur in India than in the US.
What is your stance with bureaucracy in India for an entrepreneur's perspective?
So some bureaucrats are great, others aren't, and I think that's how it is in every part of the world. So you have to just take that as you have to take what is there and then change what you can do in terms of your actions, not theirs.
What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
One was to be able to not do things half-heartedly, and when I was making a decision between also running Ocimum and running Map My Genome, one of my board members told me to just do what I want to do really badly, and that was Arjun Malhotra who gave me that advice, and I did the one that I really badly wanted to do, which was Map My Genome.
Share one of your personal habits that contribute to your success.
Uh, Being obsessive about getting things done. So
Great.
when you want to do something, you just follow it till you get it done.
Laser-like focus. I love that. Share an internet resource like Trello that you would like to share with our listeners.
I think the only website that makes you productive is Map My Genome, so you should go there. But obviously there are many other apps, but right now nothing comes to mind.
So we have an audience question, which is from Shubhamoy from Austin, Texas, for you. What is your mantra for healthy living? Is there any particular regimen you follow in your daily life?
I do. I'm not. So I do have. I do some exercise regularly, but I think my diet is much more regimented than. So I usually follow a diet of fruits, nuts, vegetables, and I don't eat dinner at night most of the time. So I usually would just drink a glass of buttermilk and eat some gasfus, like vegetables and all of that. But I think that's what keeps me healthy because I do have high predisposition to diabetes and that runs in my family as well. So those are some of the things I do for in my particular case, but I think everybody can do something based on both their genetic profile and their family history and all of that. My exercise, unfortunately, I sometimes overdo it, sometimes I don't overdo. Sometimes so I change that, and I know that's what keeps me happy. So I don't necessarily just run every day or just do yoga every day, but I would do a combination.
What book would you recommend to fellow rock stars and why?
So I think one is I just recommend them to read a lot, and I think my recommendations for books change every time. So that's why I would rather not give a specific recommendation. But there are obviously some fantastic books lately that I've been reading a lot on health. But there are also lots of books that have stuck in my brain, like Execution and Guts and few other standard books.
Could you name any one in particular?
I think I like Execution a lot, and it has a lot of that has stuck in my brain. But there have been, I mean, I read quite a few books on a regular basis.
Well, that brings us to the end of our lightning round. Anu, I've truly enjoyed listening to your journey, and the stories you shared were truly amazing. And before we say goodbye, what's one piece of guidance you would like to share with the audience and the best way we can get in touch with you?
So one thing I've noticed is that at least in the last 15 years, becoming an entrepreneur has become seen as a more glamorous, interesting role. But I would, one piece of advice is obviously to see what you want to solve and see what difference people can make rather than it's not like being an engineer that kids now also say I want to be an entrepreneur, like they said I wanted to be an engineer or a doctor. But if they want to be an entrepreneur, I think they should also think about what they're trying to solve. And I think that's one thing that I would strongly recommend people to do, because it's the in thing now, and it's important to be able to find yourself within that, in what is to be expected of individuals. And what was the second question you asked me?
What's the best way we can get in touch with you?
I'm very easy to reach. I am available on multiple things like Twitter, LinkedIn, email. Email is probably the easiest. My Twitter handle is Anu Acharya. My LinkedIn is Anu Acharya. My website is anuacharya.com. So I think it's quite easy. It's quite easy to figure out how to reach me. I think most people have been able to. If they just search, if they do a Google search, they'll be able to connect with me easily on any of these.
Fellow rockstars, you can find links to everything of value we have mentioned in today's episode by going to repodcast.com, clicking on the podcast tab and finding Anu in the archives, or just enter Anu in the search bar and her show notes will pop right up. Well, thanks a lot, Anu, for taking your valuable time out. We wish you all the best for all your future endeavors and hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, Tushar.